So I think just to prepare ourselves for this morning, after this rather hyperactive morning, we could just look at this bicycle. I invite you, maybe those who are watching us on the internet would like to see the bicycle as well. It's a very great parable, that bicycle. That's enough, probably. It was the bicycle of the postman. I think it was Joe Harrington, I think was his name, who used to pick up the mail in town, row it over to the island, sort it, deliver it by bike, then pick up the mail going out, and then row back to take the outgoing mail. And it was 100 times more efficient than it is today. But it's interesting to see the bike now as an icon hanging in the air. What is its meaning or its message to you?
Dedication.
Dedication, yes, sure.
Perseverance. Perseverance.
Perseverance.
Simplicity.
Simplicity. Very simple. No complicated gears on the bike.
It's odd that something that's made for movement should be suspended in mid-air.
Yes. So it's beautiful to look at and to think about, but it's not going to take you anywhere, is it? Not going to do anything. The wheels aren't touching the ground, so it's no longer really a tool. A tool is like an extension of the body, an extension of the mind, and it's no longer a tool. It's been taken out of use, put into a museum of the mind, and as we do with many of our ideas about God.
In Holland we have a word for that, it's air cycling, and it means being in your fantasy.
Very interesting. So in Holland there's an expression called air cycling, which means you're living in your head, you're in fantasy.
They're daydreamers.
Perfect. And it's quite somehow significant that the Dutch would have recognised that. Who always have their wheels on the ground, right? So, and that really is the image with which we culminate this reading of the 8 stages of contemplation that we've been working through. In the 8th stage, we arrive at that place of permanent departure, a place where we are always leaving from and arriving at. But the other stages of the journey, there's a sense of arrival, and maybe it's easy to get stuck at that stage. And as I've said before, it doesn't matter what stage you get stuck at, it's the being stuck that is the problem. It doesn't matter whether you're a very advanced person, whatever that means, but if you're still stuck and unable to let go of what you have learned or what you have become or what you possess, you might just as well be at stage 1. So the idea of growth or the journey or progress is not really clear to us, I think, until we get to this 8th stage. And these are not necessarily linear stages. We have to not be too sequential about this and tick off our days at stage 1, our days at stage 2 and so on. But it's in the 8th stage of contemplation that we are led upwards, he says, to the vision of what belongs to God by means of the second kind of prayer, the pure prayer proper to the contemplative. So now we're actually in pure prayer, oratio pura. And when the Desert Fathers, or the whole of this mystical tradition, speaks about prayer, they really are speaking primarily about pure prayer, or the prayer of the heart, or contemplative prayer. And of course they don't say that the other forms of prayer, whether it's the singing of the Psalms, or the reading of the Scriptures, or the celebration of the Eucharist, or other prayer devotions or practices, they don't say these are not necessary, or that you go beyond them, but they are understood in a quite different way when you've had a taste or some kind of understanding of pure prayer. And I think this is the experience of those of us who have started to meditate. That it's a great breakthrough, a great discovery when you realize that this experience of prayer, this dimension of prayer exists even. It's even good just to hear about it, even if you don't do it. It's better to know that it exists. It's obviously, if you just hear about it and don't practice it, it's a bit like looking at that bicycle. But it's better to know that it exists, that there is this horizon or this dimension, than not to know about it. That would be ignorance, in the way he's describing it. But if we do practice it, we do get on the bike of contemplation, and we do start pedaling day by day, then we begin to taste it for ourselves, and the other forms of prayer are not rendered invalid or obsolete, but they are perhaps going to be changed in the way we understand them anyway. We may find that the Mass, for example, becomes very much more of a mystical experience than just a social obligation or a religious obligation. It may still have that institutional aspect, but another window or another dimension of it has opened up for you. So the other forms of prayer are not invalidated. In fact, they are rendered more meaningful, and you're also more free to choose which other forms of prayer or practices you find useful to you. Before that, you perhaps have a sense of obligation, or a sense, depending on what kind of religious training you got, some kind of guilt, that you were told you ought to do this, you ought to pray in that way, and if you don't do it, you feel a bit guilty. Sometimes some people who have really understood meditation and started to meditate, but are still in a sort of transition to this, will say that, because they don't quite believe it's prayer, and that God would recognize it as prayer. And so they say to me, well, I begin the meditation with a prayer, just in case. Just to make sure it's okay. No, you can. We often do that, if actually, in community, to prepare for the meditation with a vocal prayer, it's fine. But not with the idea that you've got to somehow reassure God that you're not a Buddhist, or and that this is really prayer. So I think with practice you go beyond that, and I would say the centrality of pure prayer becomes more and more evident to you through your own experience. And that's why the Desert Fathers and I would say all of the people writing in the Philokalia, which is the text we've been reading it from, when they speak about prayer, they think primarily in terms of pure prayer or the prayer of the heart. So in this pure prayer, proper to the contemplative, he says the intellect, which means the higher mind, is seized during the transport of prayer by a divine longing, and it no longer knows anything at all of this world. So this is pure attention. So our minds are no longer divided. This is a moment or a state of prayer in which we are not distracted, in fact. And this is clearly the work of grace, building upon the work of faith and effort that we have made. We're not passive recipients of this gift of pure prayer. We have to prepare ourselves and receive the gift. But who knows, maybe at its own level the mind is producing its dream images and its thoughts and its air cycling. It's doing all of that, but just in the same way that your heart is beating or your lungs are involved in respiration. So, but your deepest attention is not divided between those different levels of consciousness or activities. Your attention is pure. And your prayer, you could say, really has become the prayer of Christ, who have entered into prayer of Christ, which by leaving all things, you cannot be a follower of mine without leaving all your possessions. So among all your possessions, we have to include my prayer. Very difficult thing for us to let go of. It's probably, in some ways, for a religious person, the most difficult thing to let go of. Because this seems to be the last frontier. It's my relationship to God, from which I get so many good things. So much consolation, so much hope, so many insights, so much reassurance. So to let go of my prayer seems to be really letting go of God, and indeed the mystical tradition sometimes says that. Meister Eckhart says, I pray to God to rid me of God, to let go of all bicycles in the air. So this is how he describes this transport of prayer, and then he says, in this experience you are seized by a divine longing, which is a little ambiguous, in fact. A divine longing. Is it the longing that is divine? Is it your longing for the divine? Or is it God's longing for you? And perhaps all of those aspects are true. That's why it is an experience of such completeness. And although it could be expressed in terms of longing or desire, it's at the same time satisfaction and completion, because the longing itself satisfies itself. It is a divine longing. Divine in the sense that it will never be finished. We'll never say, oh, now I've got it. Like feeling hungry and then stuffing yourself and feeling full. This appetite for God is not at that level of desire or that realm of desire. So even to speak of it as longing or as desire is really deceptive, yet it's one of the best image we have. And it's why the great mystics often use very erotic imagery to describe this experience of God. it's the closest, poetically and linguistically, maybe psychologically, it's the closest to the truth that we can come in words. So in this divine longing, which is, I think, equally our longing for God, but also God's longing for us, we experience a love. And it's a falling in love with someone who has fallen in love with you, which is, of course, very satisfying and blissful when that happens. And that's why you could say it's the 8th stage of contemplation, because you don't go any further than that, actually. That level of fulfillment, of completion, and of self-renewing happiness is, you can't imagine going further than that. Not only, but then he goes on, so we don't get deceived by the emotional or the erotic imagery. He then says something else very important. Not only does the intellect forget all things, but it forgets itself as well. Not only do we forget ourselves, do we forget our problems and our schedule and our plans and our anxieties and our memories of the news or this film that we saw last night. Not only do we forget all of that, but we actually forget ourselves. This is a different kind of forgetting. It's not the same as forgetting somebody's telephone number, or forgetting your own name, or like the story of the old people's home, which was one of the patrons was a very grand duchess or something or other. She used to come sometimes to the home, and in a rather grand way go to visit the patients, the old people there, many of whom had lost their minds and were just sitting there. And she would come and visit them, and she sat down next to one woman one day who was just looking out of the window, and said a few words, and obviously felt that she wasn't getting enough recognition. So she said to this old lady, she said, "Do you know who I am?" And the old lady said, "No, dear, but if you ask Matron, she'll tell you." So this is it's a different kind of forgetting, the forgetting of oneself, where the mind forgets itself. So what does this mean? It means not only being detached from the world, but being detached from ourselves or from our ego. As long as we are conscious of ourselves, we cannot abide in God alone. But some part of us is still dwelling within the ego system of consciousness. And this is a crucial element for understanding prayer. Again, at first it may just be a theoretical knowledge, but little by little it begins to make sense in our own experience, and we should know about it if we are to grow in prayer. And it resonates with the same theme expressed in the mystical tradition, say from the Desert Fathers, who say that the monk who knows that he is praying is not truly praying. The monk who does not know that he is praying is truly praying. Pretty clear statement. And many other examples of that throughout the literature, which suggest that the ego itself is transcended. This isn't just absorption, it's not they don't speak about it as an elimination of identity, or decreation, or there's some mystics use that language actually of decreation, but it's really just being 100% present and attentive to the other, losing yourself through this act of attention, which is an act of love, in the other, in God, and finding ourselves after that loss, or even during that loss, perhaps, in the other. So there's no finding of the self in God without this losing, this letting go. And that's, of course, where we find the difficulty. It's that last grip. It's that last hanging on to our ego identity, or our sense of self, or to what we feel familiar with. And that's, we may go a long way into these stages of contemplation, but we hang on by our fingertips to the last bit of self-knowledge. Two of our people around. But this also, even reflecting on the idea of this, is helpful, because I think it reassures us that we are letting, that what we are doing in the meditation, even if it feels at times difficult to understand, is purposeful. It has this as its purpose, and there is a theological insight here that is waiting to be fulfilled. And it's what Saint Irenaeus said, for example, that we can never know God as an object. We can only know God by sharing in God's own self-knowledge. So this knowledge is a healing knowledge, it's a saving knowledge, but it's something we cannot find or acquire by
I think we make a movement for this.
So,
just done that now.
This stage of contemplation, or this experience of the reality of God, is something that we can anticipate through our own experience, and it makes us, according to Peter Damascus, it makes us a true theologian. This is what theology is really about. This is difficult for us to understand because we've turned theology, particularly in the Western Church, into an academic discipline, into something very abstract, a kind of branch of philosophy. But in the Eastern Church, theology is mystical theology. There's no theology that doesn't relate to your experience of the stages of contemplation. And the one who prays is a theologian, and the theologian is one who prays. We find that saying in the Desert Fathers. And one of the great weaknesses of Western Christianity is certainly this divide between abstract theology and abstract dogma that has become politicized, and where we are we are told we must believe, which means, of course, we have to say we believe, because you can't force anyone to believe something. In fact, if you're told you have to believe something, you're more likely not to believe it. So if you're frightened of getting burnt at the stake, you might well say, yes, yes, I believe anything you want me to believe, I'll believe. So this very damaging split between theology and prayer, which has really undermined Western Christianity, is only healed through the recovery of this contemplative dimension of prayer. And then linking theology to, which is our thought about God, our wonderful, our wonder-filled attempt to say something about God, to prayer, to our inner experience, and the link between the two is Scripture. Between the two. So, what he is speaking about in this eighth stage of contemplation is what we read about, for example, in the cloud of unknowing. We can never know God by thought, but only by love. Now, this stage of contemplation awakens for us, I think, an understanding of the meaning of stillness, hesychia, as they call it in the Orthodox Church, which gave its name to the prayer of the heart, that whole kind of spirituality, hesychasm. And the person who prays in this way is a hesychast. And the word hesychasm itself means either stillness with an understanding of silence as well. Be still and know that I am God. So this knowledge of God, that is the goal of life, the vision of God, the contemplation of God, the fulfillment of all our love longing, as the Upanishads describe it. So this experience of God is made possible through stillness. Be still and know that I am God. Asceticism, the first three stages of the way of contemplation, is not enough to achieve dispassion, to achieve detachment, to achieve this way of life in which we come to see things as they really are, without our attachment to them or our projection onto them, or our aversion to them. So we're no longer controlled by our ego attitude to things. If you don't like something, okay, you don't like it. And you don't, if possible, you can avoid it. But you don't get worked up into a negative state, into an egotistical state. You don't become violent, you don't start, I think that's a nice word for this, you don't start gossiping, or you don't start undermining what it is or the person you don't like. You just let go of it. And you're not controlled by your aversion or your negativity. Or in the same way, if it's something or someone that you do like, then you can enjoy it in moderation without trying to possess it or control it or manipulate it. So we're speaking about actually a transformation of our psyche and of a making healthy of our psyche that is manifested in our lifestyle. But the asceticism, the training, the exercises that we have to do is not enough. Keeping the commandments is not enough. We also have to withdraw from the distractions and these attachments in the work of contemplation. So the purpose of the moral life, living a decent life and treating others with respect and controlling our own feelings or desires when necessary, that is really a preparation. We don't get rewarded for that so much. It's like Jesus says to the whoever it was, you have, we are only servant. We are only good servants. We've just done our job. That's what you paid us to do. You know, if you did an extremely good job, you might get a tip. But you know, basically, we paid you to do this work. So, the ascetical life, we don't expect to get the full reward, if you want to put it in that capitalist terms. So we need this contemplative work as well to fulfill and to complete the journey. One of the particular elements of life that he says we need to practice detachment from or withdrawal from at times is our power over others. It's very important and good insight that probably everybody somewhere in some aspects of their life is involved in a power structure. Could be at work, even if it's just a commercial transaction, the relationship between employer and employee, or even if you're not in a major position of power, it's unlikely you won't find yourself at some time exercising influence or power over others. And so he's saying that we need at times to withdraw from that power structure altogether, because there are dangers in that. Very easily the ego hooks into power or control, even if it's for the good of others. So periodically pull back, he says. And this too is the work of contemplation, pulling back from this and letting go of it. So we've gone through the eight stages of contemplation, and the way he describes this eighth stage is as delight. This is great, this is enjoyable. Taste and see the Lord is good. And whatever exercises, ascetical, disciplinary exercises we've done, or however we have learnt to let go of different levels of achievement or growth, it has all been worthwhile. We've come through into this place of freedom. So we might just pause for a moment at this stage and think about what it means to enjoy your meditation. We put a lot of emphasis, of course, on the discipline, and the spiritual life requires ascesis to begin with, training and exercise, perseverance in that exercise. Just in the same way, if you want to learn a language or a skill, or you want to take off a few pounds in the gym, you have to keep up the ascesis, the exercise. So in the same way, spiritually, we need this perseverance and this in the discipline. But it would be wrong to just leave the emphasis there. Many people who do go to the gym, or whatever it is, 3 times a week, or go running 4 times a week, they actually enjoy it. It's still a discipline. They sometimes have to push themselves to do it, but it is enjoyable in itself. And we shouldn't ever lose sight of that. And what we've been preparing for these few days is to begin the celebration of these mysteries of Easter. We begin tonight, of course, and we'll have a little preparation in the evening session for the liturgy of the Lord's Supper tonight. But these celebrations that hopefully we're a little better prepared for are celebrations. Sometimes they take us into some dark places, tomorrow especially, as we reflect upon suffering and death, and realize that we can't find the full 8th stage of contemplation without recognizing and accepting and integrating these shadows of life, or these dark and painful experiences of life. We have to integrate those. But as I've said a few times before, and as John Main often said, it's a very important Christian principle that you can forget everything else I've been saying and just keep this in your mind, really, I think, for the next, or certainly for tomorrow. We are not saved essentially by the suffering of Christ, but by the love of Christ. By the love of God in Christ that brought him to this suffering and allowed the suffering to universalize that love. But we shouldn't focus just upon the hard bit, as it were. We should remember the delight. And I have come that you may have life in all its fullness. The glory of God is the human being fully alive, and the life of the human being is the vision of God. So this is the focus, really, I think, for our Easter celebrations, and it should be equally true as the focus for our meditation day by day. And remember also what Father John says about every time we meditate, we are entering into the death and resurrection of Jesus. So every meditation session is a kind of Easter Triduum. And what we're doing in these coming days is to, as it were, zoom in or zoom out, anyway, to magnify what it is we do in our prayer through the liturgy. It's like putting it up on a screen. So we should be celebrating these sacraments and mysteries of Easter in the liturgy as a projection or manifestation of what is happening in the stillness and silence of our prayer as well. And to do this, it's just to come back to kind of a warning note, which is what the mystical and the spiritual traditions are there for, is to guide us to avoid extremes, to keep on the path. Everything depends upon focus and upon avoiding destructive extremes. On the one hand, in our practice, we avoid an overactive approach, too much effort, too much ego attempt to achieve all these experiences, or to achieve all these insights, or to become what we think we should be. So to avoid application on the one hand, and on the other hand, to avoid just being lazy, being like this bicycle up there, just looking at it, but not actually getting on it and riding it, doing what the Dutch call air cycling. So, but somehow the spiritual life is this constant monitoring of our being on the path, avoiding excessive activity or excessive application, or lethargy and laziness on the other hand. And then also to help us to stay on this path, although any journey, and these 8 stages of contemplation represent a journey, every journey has a sense of a destination. And this both encourages us to set out. If you set out on a journey, you don't know where you're going. It's a little challenging to your sense of meaning. But to focus too much or to imagine too much what the goal would be like can also be unhelpful and undermine your practice. So, in one sense, it's important to recognize that we have a goal which is never, can never be reduced to a final possession. You're always going to have to let go of any stage that you get to and move on. That's the mystery of God. But at the same time, you need to give yourself wholeheartedly to the practice, so that you could almost say the practice and the perfection are one. It's the same thing. If I just do the practice wholeheartedly, generously, simply, faithfully, lovingly, if I pray in that way, then that's it. That's all I have to worry about in terms of my reward or my perfection. So, let's say thank you to Peter of Damascus for giving us some tips about our own journey. And we'll take, I see our yoga man has just gone out of the room. But we'll take a time for meditation now. Welcome to Peter and John, who've just arrived. Peter Ing and John Stadzinski. Just parachuted in, I think, did you? Yes, they were. So we'll take the meditation now, and then we'll